The village had never seen a child like her. From the moment she could walk, her steps carried rhythm, as though the earth itself whispered beats beneath her feet. When other children stumbled through games or tired quickly, she moved as though guided by something unseen. Her ankles were strong, her posture upright, and her hands flowed like water whenever she lifted them. The old women would sometimes pause their weaving just to watch her sway to the hum of cicadas or the drum of rainfall on thatched roofs. Even before she knew what dance was, her body answered the call of rhythm as naturally as breathing. As she grew, this gift deepened. At every festival, when drums echoed through the clearing, she would step forward almost shyly and the crowd would quiet. Her movements told stories without words: the sorrow of lost hunters, the joy of new harvests, the laughter of children born healthy. Each sway of her waist, each turn of her head, carried meaning that reached even the hardest hearts. The elders, who had watched countless dancers in their youth, found themselves leaning forward, lips parted, as if they were children seeing wonder for the first time. When she danced, it was not only her body moving, it was as if the spirits themselves moved with her. Yet beauty that shines too brightly can also cast shadows. Among her peers, envy stirred. Girls who once played beside her began to sneer behind her back. They mocked her silence when she did not respond to their taunts. They whispered that no one could move like that without unnatural help. The boys, too, looked at her with conflicted eyes, some filled with admiration, others with resentment, as though her grace threatened their place in the village. Her gift unsettled the elders as well, though they tried to hide it. At first, they spoke proudly of her, telling visitors that their village had been blessed with one whose feet spoke with the ancestors. But in private their voices wavered. A girl should not carry such power, one muttered. It will lead her astray. Another whispered, the spirits may take her from us if she grows too strong. Fear hid behind their admiration, fear that what they did not understand might one day turn against them. Still she remained humble. She never boasted of her ability, never demanded attention. If asked to dance, she obeyed. If told to sit, she obeyed as well. She moved with respect, bowing her head when praised, thanking those who cheered her. She lived as any other child, helping her mother pound grain, fetching water from the stream, gathering firewood at dawn. Her laughter was light, her kindness steady, and for every friend who turned cold with jealousy, there were elders who quietly adored her. But envy grows like a weed, feeding on whispers and glances until it spreads unseen. Some began to claim that her movements were too perfect, too fluid. They said no human could dance as she did without summoning spirits. When storms blew suddenly during her practice, some muttered that she had called them. When crops grew strangely tall in fields she walked across, others said it was her steps, not the rain, that had changed them. The same beauty that had once drawn admiration now drew suspicion. She noticed, of course, though she never spoke of it. She saw the way neighbors who once greeted her with warmth now avoided her eyes. She felt the chill when laughter hushed as she entered a group. Sometimes at night she cried softly into her mat, wondering why a gift that had brought joy could also bring so much distance. But in the morning she always rose, washed her face and smiled again. She believed that kindness could mend what envy had broken. On days of celebration, when drums echoed across the fields, she still stepped forward. The firelight flickered across her skin, and she let the rhythm claim her body. Children gasped, elders nodded, and for a moment the whispers ceased, for no one could deny what they saw. It was not trickery, nor curse, nor omen. It was pure, unbroken grace. Her feet pressed stories into the soil, her arms shaped the air, and even the trees seemed to sway with her. In those moments her gift was undeniable and all were caught in its spell. But the spell never lasted. As soon as the drums quieted, the doubts returned. Some clapped politely and left quickly, unwilling to linger near her. Others muttered that too much beauty leads to ruin, that too much rhythm summons shadows. And so admiration and fear tangled together, tightening like vines around her life. She felt both loved and unloved, praised and distrusted, lifted up and cast down. Yet through it all she never stopped dancing. Even when alone, she moved in silence, her bare feet drawing patterns in the dust, her arms shaping invisible worlds. For her, dance was not a performance, not even a choice, it was breath. It was the language her soul had been born speaking. And though the village wrestled with their envy and fear, the earth beneath her feet and the wind around her body never hesitated. They moved with her, always, as though they too knew she carried a rhythm older than fear, deeper than envy, a rhythm that no cruelty could silence forever. They gathered in the heart of the village, voices sharp and heavy with envy masked as concern. The girl, who from childhood carried within her an elegance that no one could deny, had become both the pride and the threat of the people. Her dances were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. When she stepped into the dust and began to move, the ground itself seemed to echo her rhythm. Children followed her, clapping their hands in joy, women swayed their shoulders without realizing, and even the old men, who claimed to despise frivolity, found their feet tapping under their robes. Her movements carried both joy and mystery, a rhythm that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than the drum, as though the spirits themselves had taught her how to move. But where beauty rose, jealousy grew beside it, and soon the whispers began. "They say her dance unsettles the ancestors," muttered one woman, her lips curled with bitterness. "A girl should not move in such ways. It is dangerous." Others nodded, their eyes narrowing, though the truth was that it was not danger they feared but her light outshining their own. The elders, too, were not blind to how the people gathered whenever she appeared, how the young men could not take their eyes off her, and how her radiance reminded them of a power they could not control. To maintain their hold, they clothed their envy in superstition. One evening, after the drums had beaten and the festival fires flickered high, the elders called her before the council. She stood with bare feet planted firmly on the earth, her eyes lowered but her spirit unbowed. They raised their staffs, their faces stern, and one of them declared, "Your movements bring omens of unrest. Your body speaks to spirits we do not understand. We forbid you to dance again." Gasps rose from the crowd, and silence hung heavy after. Children clutched their mothers' hands in confusion, while the men and women shifted uneasily, torn between awe and obedience. The girl did not speak, for what words could answer such injustice? Her silence was mistaken for submission, and the decree was sealed. But the truth was known to her heart. They were afraid, not of omens but of what her gift revealed, that joy and freedom could not be controlled by decrees. That movement could be a language of resistance. In the nights that followed, she sat alone in her hut, her body aching to move as though her limbs carried a fire that could not be contained. Sometimes, when the moon shone bright and the village slept, she would sway in secret, her shadow bending along the walls, her feet whispering across the floor. The rhythm within her could not die, even if the whole world turned against it. The villagers, meanwhile, began to live under the weight of their own choice. Festivals grew quieter, the drums lost their vibrance, and dances felt hollow. Though no one spoke it aloud, they all knew something vital had been silenced. The women missed the joy in their daughters' eyes when they mimicked the girl's steps, the children missed the laughter, and even the elders, though proud of their decree, could not deny the emptiness. Yet pride is a stubborn wall, and none dared admit they had stolen the light from their own lives. The girl bore her exile in dignity, though her heart ached with each passing day. She longed to dance not only for herself but for the joy it gave others, the healing it brought, the connection it sparked between earth and sky. Her gift had never been hers alone, it belonged to all who felt its power. And yet, here she was, silenced, treated as though she were cursed instead of blessed. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon and shadows stretched long, she walked beyond the village boundaries to the edge of the forest. Alone, she let her body sway just slightly, her hands lifting as though to touch the fading light. Her feet traced circles in the dust, each movement a prayer, a quiet defiance. She felt the earth hum beneath her, as though unseen watchers stirred at her steps. She stopped, fear rising in her chest, and quickly stilled herself. Had the elders been right? Or was it their decree that would summon the very spirits they claimed to fear? From that night, she carried an unease, for though forbidden, the rhythm within her pulsed stronger with every heartbeat. It was no longer only a gift, it was becoming something more, something alive and waiting. She could feel it growing, pressing against the cage the elders had tried to build. And somewhere deep within, a voice whispered that when the time came, no ban, no superstition, and no envy would be strong enough to stop what had already begun to awaken. She tried to obey. Day after day, she forced herself into stillness, though it felt as unnatural as asking the river not to flow. When the women gathered to pound grain and their laughter carried songs into the air, her body would instinctively sway, her feet itching to mark the rhythm in the dust. She would stop herself, digging her toes into the earth until they hurt, reminding herself of the decree. The elders had forbidden her. To disobey meant punishment, perhaps exile, and though her spirit burned, she did not wish to bring shame upon her family. Yet the silence pressed heavily upon her chest, and every unexpressed movement felt like a chain tightening around her. Her nights were the hardest. Alone in the small hut, she would close her eyes, and dreams of dancing would come unbidden. She saw herself moving beneath the moon, her arms sweeping like the branches of trees, her feet stamping life into the earth. In the dream she felt free, radiant, her body weightless. But every time she woke she was still in silence, her limbs heavy, her heart aching as though she had been trapped behind invisible bars. The hunger to dance was not only in her muscles, it was in her blood, in the very marrow of her being. To deny it was to cut off her breath, yet she endured, waiting, hoping that time would ease the longing. Instead it only grew sharper. The villagers noticed the change in her. The girl who once glowed like morning light now carried shadows in her eyes. She spoke less, laughed rarely, and often walked apart from others. Where her presence once brought joy, now there was a quiet sadness that made even children pause and stare. "She looks thinner," some whispered. "Perhaps the ban has crushed her spirit." Yet none stepped forward to defend her. Fear of the elders' decree weighed heavier than compassion, and so they turned away, leaving her to carry her sorrow alone. Her body began to betray her restraint. Sometimes, while carrying water from the stream, her shoulders would roll with an instinctive rhythm. Sometimes, while tending the fire, her feet would shuffle just slightly to the crackling beat of wood. When she realized she would stop abruptly, heart pounding, terrified that someone had seen. Even her own reflection in the water seemed to mock her, a girl alive but not living, chained by a command born of envy and superstition. Inside her, the sorrow deepened into something heavier. It was not only grief for herself but for the silence that had fallen over the village. She remembered how children once danced with her, how women forgot their burdens when they followed her steps, how even the elders once smiled, though reluctantly. Now the festivals felt hollow, the drums beaten without spirit, and the songs sung without life. It was as if her suppression had chained not only her but the entire village. Yet no one admitted it. They endured, just as she endured, in a silence that gnawed away at the heart of their community. There were nights when she lay awake, tears sliding into her hair, wishing she had been born without this gift. Perhaps then she would have lived simply like the others, unnoticed and unenvied. But the rhythm within her was not something she had chosen. It was something she had been born with, as natural as breathing. And so, her sorrow was not only in the loss of her dance but in the loss of herself. Each day of obedience chipped away at her spirit, and she feared that soon there would be nothing left of the girl she once was. Still she endured. For though her heart broke and her spirit felt chained, she told herself she must wait. There must be wisdom and patience. Perhaps the elders would see reason, perhaps the people would remember what joy she had once brought, perhaps the spirits themselves would not allow such cruelty to last forever. She clung to that fragile hope even as the fire within her flickered low, even as her body ached from holding back what it was born to do. And so, the silent sorrow continued, pressing heavier with each passing day, waiting for the moment when silence itself would become unbearable. Her bare feet struck the earth in patterns older than the memory of her people, and the ground itself seemed to quiver with each step. What began as a lonely dance under the moon became something far more. The soil trembled faintly, not in the way it did when the wind pushed against the trees, but in a deeper, pulsing rhythm, as though the earth was listening. Her heels thudded, her toes brushed the dust, and her sorrowful spins marked a circle of power across the clearing. For the first time she felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her, heavy and watchful. The trees around her, once still, began to murmur with a sound not entirely made by the wind. Leaves rustled in unison, branches creaked as though bending to observe her. The air thickened, cool at first but then warm, charged, tingling against her skin. A strange hush spread across the night. Crickets, frogs, and even the owls that called from the dark fell silent, their voices swallowed by the rhythm she had summoned. The world held its breath, and in that silence, the first stirring began. Beneath her feet, roots twisted like serpents shifting in their sleep. The soil, damp with dew, seemed to hum faintly as though voices deep within it were rising toward the surface. The girl felt it before she saw it, a vibration running up her legs, through her bones, echoing in her chest like the deep pulse of a hidden drum. Her body paused mid-turn, her arms frozen in the air, as a shiver crawled down her spine. Something ancient had awakened, something that had slumbered quietly until her forbidden dance stirred it back into memory. The wind rose suddenly, swirling in tight circles around her. It tugged at her hair, lifting the strands like threads of fire in the moonlight. Her dress clung and billowed with each gust, as though the air itself sought to become part of her movements. The grasses in the clearing bent low, bowing, and the branches of nearby trees leaned toward her, their leaves trembling not with fear but with anticipation. She no longer felt alone. She could not see them yet, but she knew there were watchers in the dark. Animals hidden in burrows and nests pressed close to the earth, their instincts screaming of a presence that did not belong to the ordinary world. Dogs chained at the edge of the village whined and growled low, sensing what their masters could not. A goat bleated sharply once, then went quiet as if smothered by the weight of an unseen hand. Even the insects, countless and tireless, hushed their chorus, leaving only the sound of her feet against the soil and the wild thud of her heart in her ears. Her dance had changed. It was no longer the sorrowful release of a silenced girl, but a ritual she had not been taught, one carved into the bones of the land itself. Each step carried her deeper into a rhythm that was not hers alone, but one shared with the unseen, with those who lay beyond the veil of the living. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the ground, bending and swaying as if they too had been pulled into the rhythm. In the corner of her vision, shapes flickered, thin figures between the trees, glowing eyes that vanished when she tried to look directly at them. The whispers began softly, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the leaves. They were not in any language she knew, yet she understood them with a clarity that frightened her. Voices of the forgotten, voices of the buried, voices of those who had been silenced as she had been, each one murmuring, urging, calling her deeper into the rhythm. The whispers grew stronger with each beat of her feet, layering upon one another until they became a low chant echoing in her mind. Her body moved without thought now, as though guided by something beyond her will. Her arms traced patterns of light in the air, her feet struck harder against the ground, and each movement seemed to ripple outward, sending waves of energy into the earth. Sparks of dust rose beneath her steps, glowing faintly like embers before dissolving into the night. She gasped but did not stop. She could not stop. The dance had become larger than her sorrow, larger than her rebellion. It had become a bridge between worlds. Unseen eyes burned in the shadows, dozens, hundreds perhaps, all watching with unblinking intensity. She felt their gaze as a weight on her skin, heavy yet electric, as though it was feeding her strength instead of draining it. For the first time in her life she was not dancing to please, not dancing to entertain, not dancing to prove herself. She was dancing to summon. And the summons had been answered. The air thickened until every breath felt like drinking smoke and light at once. Her body spun, her feet struck the soil in steady rhythm, and with each beat the veil between worlds grew thinner. The whispers that had hovered just out of reach sharpened into voices, layered and unearthly, carrying tones of both sorrow and reverence. Then, without warning, the clearing bloomed with light not born of fire or moon but of presence. Shapes began to shimmer at the edges of her vision, flickering like heat waves, until they solidified into forms that were both human and more than human. From the soil rose figures draped in the dust of centuries, their outlines wavering but unmistakable, ancestors of the land, spirits of those whose bones had long been claimed by the earth. Their faces glowed faintly, not with warmth but with the pale illumination of memory, their eyes burning like embers. Some carried staffs of light, others were cloaked in leaves and vines as though the forest itself had woven their garb. They formed a circle around her, their feet never fully touching the ground, hovering just slightly above the soil she had awakened. The trees themselves exhaled spirits. From their trunks slipped tall beings of bark and shadow, their bodies etched with patterns that pulsed like sap glowing beneath the surface. Their eyes were deep hollows lit from within, watching her with a gaze that held the weight of seasons and storms. Branches bent low as though bowing in reverence, while some of these elemental guardians stretched their limbs to sway with her rhythm, their movements slow, tidal, and solemn. Above her, the wind split into voices, and the sky shimmered as if stitched with threads of flame. Out of the air descended luminous shapes with wings that were not feathers but woven smoke, shimmering like auroras against the dark. They circled her in spirals, trailing currents of light that lingered like falling stars. Each beat of her foot drew them closer, their song layering with the ancestral chants that now filled the night, creating a chorus that was both beautiful and terrible. The girl's body trembled as she realized what she had summoned. Her dance had not only called the spirits of her ancestors but also awakened the elements themselves, earth, wind, and tree bound in living form. They circled her, studying her, their faces unreadable. Some swayed as if moved by her sorrow, their glow softening. Others stood rigid, their eyes hard, as though they had come not to console but to weigh her soul against the cruelty of the living. Her breath caught in her chest. She stumbled for half a second, her heart racing, but the rhythm carried her forward. She could not stop. Every movement seemed to command them, or perhaps it was the opposite. Every flick of her wrist, every stamp of her foot was guided by their will. She no longer knew whether she was dancing for herself or for them, but her body was an instrument they had chosen. The spirits began to move with her. Ancestors swayed with outstretched arms, as though weaving invisible threads in the air. Tree beings let their limbs crack and stretch in rhythm, their wooden bodies groaning like drums. The winged shapes above dove and rose in sweeping arcs, tracing symbols in the sky. The circle tightened around her, the clearing alive with light and sound, the air pulsing as though it carried the heartbeat of two worlds colliding. The villagers stirred in their huts at the sudden change in the air. Some dared to peek out, and what they saw turned their blood to ice. From a distance, they could see the clearing glowing as though a fire burned there, but no flames rose, only shapes, towering, shimmering figures that circled the girl. They could hear the chant, feel the vibrations running through the earth into their bones, and though none of them dared approach, terror rooted itself in their hearts. The forbidden dance had indeed awakened omens, but these were no simple warnings. This was judgment manifesting. Back in the circle, the girl's sorrow turned to awe. Her tears no longer fell from grief but from the enormity of the moment. She had thought herself small, powerless, broken by silence and restriction. Yet here she stood, her body the bridge, her movements the language that brought the unseen into sight. The spirits did not look at her with malice, but neither did they offer comfort. Their gazes pierced, searching, measuring. And still she danced because she understood. To stop now would be to deny the summons, to insult the presence of those who had come. So she poured her soul into each step, spinning within the circle of spirits who judged and admired her all at once. Above, the moon glowed brighter as if it too leaned closer to witness. The girl who was forbidden to dance had become the center of a gathering between worlds, her sorrow turned into a power that called forth justice. The village could not sleep that night. A strange glow pulsed from the clearing, flickering against the sky like lightning held in one place. The elders, restless and uneasy, whispered among themselves, their faces pale in the firelight. Mothers hushed their children, though their own hands trembled, and men who had once spoken boldly of control felt their throats tighten as the earth vibrated faintly beneath them. The air itself carried a charge, a thrumming rhythm that seeped into every hut, rattling gourds, stirring ashes in the hearths. They all knew what it meant. She was dancing. At first some denied it. "It is only the wind," one elder muttered, though his eyes betrayed the lie. Another spat, "If she dances then she defies us. She must be stopped before she calls ruin on us all." But beneath their bravado was something else, fear. Fear that their decree had been powerless. Fear that her gift, the very gift they had tried to smother, had outgrown them. At last a group of men rose, carrying spears and torches, determined to end it. Jealous women followed, their tongues sharp with curses, and the elders stumbled behind, cloaked in self-righteousness. Together they moved toward the clearing, a procession of malice and dread. The children and the old who dared not go trailed at a distance, drawn by curiosity, their wide eyes reflecting the glow that grew brighter with every step. When they reached the edge of the trees they froze. In the moonlit clearing she was not alone. Spirits circled her, shimmering forms of light and shadow, ancestral figures whose faces bore the lines of centuries, elemental beings of bark and flame and wind. They towered above her, their movements synchronized with her dance, their eyes glowing with unearthly brilliance. The air sang with rhythm, 1,000 voices layered together, and the ground itself throbbed like the skin of a drum. The villagers gasped, but anger spurred some forward. "Stop this at once," one elder shouted, his voice shrill, echoing more with fear than authority. "You dare bring this evil upon us? You dare defy the word of your elders?" Another hurled a stone toward her, but before it reached her, the air thickened. A wall of unseen force caught it mid-flight and dropped it harmlessly to the soil. Then the spirits moved. They turned as one, facing the villagers. Eyes like burning coals fixed on them, weighing, piercing, stripping away their pretenses. Those who had spoken loudest of bad omens felt their knees weaken. The women who had mocked her beauty and grace now found their voices stuck in their throats. Even the men with spears faltered as the ground beneath them rumbled, the soil cracking faintly as though warning them to take one more step at their peril. Still, one man raised his spear and rushed forward. The girl's dance did not falter, but a spirit of towering bark and shadow extended an arm. The man's spear turned to ash in his hands before he could strike. He stumbled back, wailing, clutching the smoldering fragments, his courage burned away. A howl rose from the villagers, some in fear, others in rage, but none dared advance again. The spirits encircled her, forming a living barrier. With every turn of her body, their glow pulsed brighter, their eyes sharper. The villagers tried to shout her down, to call her a curse, a bringer of ruin, but their words twisted back at them, sounding hollow, exposed under the weight of the spirit's gaze. Their hypocrisy was laid bare. They had called her a danger, yet it was their envy that had condemned her. They had claimed her dance invited misfortune, yet it was their cruelty that had drawn judgment upon themselves. Children who had followed hid behind trees, peeking with wide eyes. For them awe outweighed fear. They saw not a curse but beauty, truth, and power, something their parents had tried to crush. Whispers spread even among the women in the crowd, perhaps we were wrong, perhaps she was chosen. But the elders snarled, clinging to their authority, though sweat gleamed on their brows and their voices shook. The girl did not speak. She had no need to. Her body spoke for her, every motion a testimony, every turn of her foot a declaration. The spirits amplified her truth, exposing theirs. The villagers, for all their torches and threats, were powerless in the face of what had gathered. And deep inside each of them knew the truth they dared not voice. She had been right all along, and they had been the ones who courted doom. At the edge of the clearing, the torches flickered, their flames dimming as the wind rose, carrying with it whispers that did not belong to the living. The villagers shuddered, clutching their chests, unable to look away from the circle of light and judgment. Their hypocrisy hung in the air like smoke, undeniable, suffocating. For the first time, they realized that it was not her dance that was cursed, it was their cruelty, and tonight it had been dragged into the open for all to see. The rhythm of her dance shifted. What began as sorrowful and fluid became sharp, deliberate, unrelenting. The spirits tightened their circle around her, their forms blazing brighter with each movement. It was no longer simply a dance of defiance, it was a ritual. Justice had entered the clearing, wearing her body as its vessel. Her arms swept wide and the air cracked like a whip. One elder, the loudest voice against her since childhood, fell to his knees as if struck by an invisible hand. He clutched his chest, gasping, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The crowd recoiled, but the girl's feet did not pause. She spun, her heels striking the earth, and the ground rippled outward. Another villager, one who had once mocked her bloodied knees as she knelt on thorns, stumbled back as roots burst from the soil, coiling around his legs. They pulled him down, dragging him into the dirt until only his terrified face remained above the earth. Gasps turned to cries. Some tried to flee, but the spirits moved faster. Shimmering forms blocked the exits, their glowing eyes locking onto the guilty. The girl's movements guided them. Every turn, every stomp, every sway summoned retribution. Her dance was a verdict, and the spirits were the executioners. She bent low, her palms brushing the ground, and the air filled with whispers. A woman in the crowd, one who had spread lies that the girl's gift was cursed, screamed as her voice was stolen mid-cry. She clutched her throat, but no sound came. The spirit's judgment was clear. Those who had poisoned others with words would never speak falsehood again. Her silence was her punishment. The girl rose again, spinning in a flurry of movement. Her hair whipped around her face, her eyes glowing with reflection of the spirit's fire. When her foot slammed into the earth, a gust of wind roared outward, slamming into a group of men who had tried to bar her from dancing. Their torches were extinguished instantly, their weapons torn from their hands and flung into the darkness. They stumbled back, coughing, their pride crushed like brittle clay. Yet not all were struck. The spirit's judgment was precise. Some villagers, trembling but innocent of cruelty, were left untouched. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, watching wide-eyed, unharmed. A few women who had quietly pitied the girl but never spoken against her stood still as the winds passed them by, their clothes and hair fluttering but their bodies safe. The dance knew who was guilty and who was not. The elders tried to rally. "This is madness. Stop her," one shouted, though his voice cracked. But as the girl lifted her arms above her head and brought her foot down hard, a spear of light struck the ground before him, the earth splitting at his toes. He toppled backward, sprawling in the dirt, his dignity shattered. The spirits loomed closer, their faces stern, and he cowered, no longer the proud leader he had pretended to be. One by one the guilty were marked. Some were struck silent, some bound by roots, some knocked to the earth where their bodies trembled under unseen weight. Each punishment fit the crime. Liars lost their tongues. Oppressors found themselves shackled by the very soil they had walked upon so proudly. Those who had mocked her gift now shook uncontrollably, their own limbs moving against their will in grotesque mimicry of her dance, until exhaustion dropped them to the ground. The villagers watched, torn between horror and awe. They had never seen power wielded so precisely, so mercilessly, yet so justly. It was not wild destruction. It was justice, measured and inescapable. No plea could undo what they had done. No excuse could shield them from what the spirits already knew. The girl's dance grew faster, more furious, her body a storm of motion. The spirits followed in perfect rhythm, their forms blazing like fire in the night. She leapt and lightning forked across the sky. She spun, and the trees themselves groaned, branches bowing low as though bearing witness. She stomped, and the guilty cried out as the ground beneath them shuddered. For the first time the villagers understood. This was never a curse. It was a gift, a sacred bond between her and the forces that watched over the land. They had feared it, tried to bury it, tried to chain it, but in doing so they had revealed themselves as the true corruptors. Her dance was not destruction. It was balance restored. Finally, her movements slowed, but the judgment was not yet finished. She raised her arms high, and the circle of spirits widened. The entire village, gathered at the edge of the clearing, was bathed in their glow. Every soul was weighed in silence. Hearts pounded, breaths caught. None dared speak. The guilty trembled, already marked. The innocent waited, unsure if they too would be claimed. Then, with one last, powerful step, the girl ended the ritual. The spirits released their victims. Some fell limp, shamed and broken. Others remained bound or voiceless, condemned to live with the consequences of their cruelty. But all understood what had happened. Justice had been served through her dance. The clearing was silent except for her breathing. The spirits hovered a moment longer, their eyes lingering on the villagers, then turned back to her. They bowed in unison before fading into the night like mist under morning sun. The girl stood tall, chest heaving, sweat glistening, her face lit by moonlight. The villagers dared not move. No one could call her cursed now. She had been the vessel of judgment, the one chosen to reveal the truth. And as they looked upon her, they knew the world they had built on lies and cruelty had been shattered in a single night of dancing. The village that once thrummed with laughter and chatter now quivered in silence, broken only by the echoes of her dance. The clearing still smelled of scorched earth, and smoke curled lazily into the night sky as if the air itself mourned what had transpired. Fire licked the edges of the huts nearest the dancing ground, small flames fed by sparks that had leapt from her steps. Though the fire did not consume everything, it left blackened scars across the wooden walls, marks that would never be erased. Those who had been punished lay scattered. Some sat clutching their throats, silent forevermore. Others wept as their legs trembled, bound by roots that held them tight against the ground. Still others stared blankly into the night, eyes wide with the unspoken knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. The guilty bore their marks in plain sight, each wound, each silence, each humiliation carved into them like a brand. No one could hide who they were anymore. The spirits had seen and all had witnessed the judgment. Among the crowd, the innocent stood frozen, untouched by flame or wind. They were spared, but their hearts raced with terror. Mothers clutched children who had watched the spectacle with wide eyes, unsure if what they had seen was a nightmare or a revelation. Fathers who had remained quiet while others plotted against her now lowered their heads, ashamed that silence had been their shield when it should have been their voices. The girl herself stood at the center, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her hair clung to her damp skin, her eyes glowing faintly with the fading energy of the spirits. Around her, the air still moved in uneasy patterns. Gusts of wind curled around her legs, shadows twisted and stretched unnaturally, and fire flickered as though bowing to her presence. The elements themselves seemed unwilling to release her fully, as though they were bound to her rhythm even after the dance had ended. The villagers dared not approach. Each step she had taken, each movement of her body, had brought devastation to their pride and their lives. Their fields had wilted as the curse unfolded, and now the judgment had stripped them of their certainty. Crops lay trampled and scorched along the village's edges. Smoke from dying fires mixed with the sweet scent of crushed earth, and the sound of the spirits' whispers still lingered faintly in the wind. The village was no longer a place of safety but a hollow reminder of their cruelty and folly. The elders, once so bold, now cowered like frightened children. One who had proclaimed her gift as cursed more than anyone, was forced onto his knees by a weight none could see. He begged silently, his voice lost, his hands trembling as he reached out for forgiveness. But there was no answer. The girl simply turned her gaze toward him, calm, steady, unrelenting. The silence between them was louder than thunder, and the elder bowed his head, his pride burned to ash. Those who had once mocked her now wept. They saw in the devastation around them not only punishment but a mirror of their own malice. The dance had not destroyed the innocent, but it had revealed the truth of the guilty. The winds that had howled through the village carried with them a message. The spirits had always been watching, and the girl had always been chosen. Their envy had blinded them, their superstition had condemned them, and now they were left to live with the weight of their deeds. As the fire smoldered and the shadows quieted, regret settled heavily over the people. They could not undo what had been done. The girl's rhythm had bound them to consequences they could neither escape nor deny. Every scar on their huts, every withered plant, every broken elder was a reminder. Children looked at their parents differently, their eyes filled with questions that no one dared to answer. The night was long, and though the flames dimmed and the winds stilled, the memory of the dance lingered in every breath. No song, no laughter, no word rose from the village. Only silence, heavy and suffocating, stretched between them. It was not the silence of peace but of regret, the hollow space left when truth had shattered lies. At the center of it all, the girl finally lowered her arms. She said nothing, offered no words of forgiveness or threat. She simply stood, her figure outlined by the faint glow of embers, her presence a reminder of both mercy and judgment. For though devastation surrounded them, the village still stood. The spirits had not demanded complete destruction. They had demanded balance. And now, every villager bore the responsibility of living with what they had allowed, what they had done, and what they had lost. The night ended with the sky heavy with stars, but no one slept. Each beat of their hearts carried the echo of her rhythm, and with every breath, they were reminded that they had summoned their own doom through envy and cruelty. The ashes of regret clung to them like shadows, and no amount of dawn light could drive them away. When the last ember dimmed and the winds stilled, silence fell over the village like a heavy cloak. The spirits that had circled her were gone, dissolving back into the unseen realm with the same mystery that had brought them forth. Their whispers faded into the night air, leaving only the faint scent of earth, smoke and rain. At the center of the clearing, where her feet had carved patterns of fire and shadow into the soil, the girl stood still, her breathing soft, her gaze steady. She seemed no longer entirely of the world, as if the spirits had left a part of themselves within her. For a moment, the villagers thought she might speak, might give them a final word of judgment or mercy. But she remained silent. Then, as the moonlight shifted and the shadows lengthened, she began to fade. It was not sudden, not like a flame being snuffed out, but gradual, as though she were stepping deeper into the veil between life and spirit. Her outline blurred, her figure dissolving into the air. Some claimed she walked into the trees, her body becoming one with the forest. Others swore that the earth itself opened to receive her, the soil swallowing her whole like a mother reclaiming her child. A few whispered that she had risen into the sky, her steps becoming stars that would forever dance above. No one could agree, but all saw the same truth: she was gone. The villagers stood frozen, too afraid to move, too burdened with regret to speak. The ground bore the marks of what had happened: burnt patches of soil, twisted roots where spirits had risen, and the scars of fire across huts and trees. Every sign was a reminder, every breath of wind a faint echo of her rhythm. They knew the story would never fade because it was carved not only into the earth but into their memories, branded into their guilt. Children would later ask what had happened that night, and the elders, those who survived, could never tell the story without trembling. They would say, she was the girl who was forbidden to dance, but when she did, she summoned the spirits. Some told it as a tale of warning, that envy and cruelty summoned their own destruction, and that to silence beauty is to invite wrath. Others retold it with awe, that the spirits themselves chose her as their vessel, a dancer whose steps carried justice no sword or weapon could ever bring. But no matter how it was spoken, her story spread beyond the village. Traders carried whispers of it to other lands, storytellers wove it into their songs, and wanderers carried it like a secret gift into distant places. Over time she became more than a girl in memory. She became a legend. To some, she was a saint of rhythm, a spirit who watched over dancers and musicians, ensuring their gifts could never again be chained. To others, she was a vengeful figure, a warning that those who sought to smother light and beauty would find themselves judged. In remote villages, parents warned their children, "Do not mock what you do not understand, for the girl of the forbidden dance still listens." In festivals, dancers sometimes invoked her name, their feet striking the ground with both reverence and fear, as if to honor her presence and appease the spirits that once moved with her. Her story was not told with joy but with weight. Every telling carried the echo of her sorrow, her loneliness, her silent defiance. And yet, it carried hope as well, that even in a world where cruelty sought to bind her, the rhythm within her could not be silenced. She was remembered as the girl whose dance had been denied but never extinguished, whose steps called forth forces greater than any human power. Generations passed and the place where she once danced grew wild. The clearing where the spirits had descended was avoided by many, but the brave sometimes ventured there. Some claimed that on nights of a full moon, when the earth was still and the wind quiet, they could hear faint drumbeats or the rustling sound of bare feet moving across the soil. Others swore they had seen her silhouette, a figure of light and shadow, moving gracefully beneath the trees. Those who heard or saw these things never doubted what they had witnessed. The legend had not faded, it had only deepened. She had become eternal. The girl forbidden to dance was no longer just a girl. She was a force, a memory carried in every drumbeat, every song, every movement of a dancer's feet upon the earth. She was proof that rhythm is more than sound and motion. It is the language of the spirit, a truth that cannot be chained by envy, fear, or superstition. And so her story lingered, a legend whispered around fires, sung in hushed tones by storytellers, and remembered every time a dancer's steps stirred dust and echoed through the night. Her disappearance had not ended her presence. It had only ensured that she lived forever, not as flesh and blood, but as a rhythm that would never die.